When my younger brother knocked on my door at midnight, his voice trembling, I never expected the conversation that followed would change everything between us. My name is Lily. I'm 25, and I thought I was just visiting home to watch over Jack while our parents were away. But what unfolded that weekend made me question the lines between closeness, comfort, and something else entirely. Have you ever had a bond so deep it started to blur? A moment so intense you weren't sure whether to hold on or walk away? Let me tell you what really happened, and I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a connection that challenged your understanding of love or loyalty? I hadn't been back to the house in a very long time. Everything was so familiar, it made my heart sink. The cream colored carpet in the hallway, the faint scent of lemon from the floor cleaner my mom always liked to use, and the soft creaking of the wooden door I used to sneak out through at night. Nothing had changed, but I had. I'm Lily, 25 years old, living in the city in a small, tidy apartment, busy with office work and grown up concerns. Coming back here, I felt like my 17-year-old self was still standing in the mirror, silently watching me. Jack opened the door while I was still lost in memory. Haven't seen you in a while, he said, his voice rough, either from just waking up or because it had deepened a lot since I last heard it. I smiled, stepped inside, and hugged him. You've gotten taller. Shrug. I'm 18 now. Did you forget? I shook my head. Not that I forgot, I just hadn't caught up. In my memory, Jack was still the tousle-hamed boy with bright eyes every time I came home for the holidays. And now, he was a young man, tall, lanky, with eyes far more thoughtful than his age. Mom and Dad already left, I asked, dropping my bag on the couch. Yeah. Early this morning. They said you were coming, so I tidied up the living room a bit. He shrugged again, trying to seem nonchalant, but I knew Jack still had that habit, doing small things to be noticed while pretending not to care. I walked around the room, my eyes skimming over every familiar object. Nothing new, nothing strange, except a few photos of Jack near the stairs. Him in a basketball uniform, at an awards ceremony at school. You've done well, I said softly, touching one of the frames. Jack didn't respond. He walked into the kitchen, poured 2 glasses of water, and handed me one. Have you eaten? No, I replied, but you don't have to cook anything. I haven't either. I got instant noodles, eggs, and stuff you'll probably complain about. I laughed. So, just give me something edible, I'm good. He just simple to nurse. Noodles with fried eggs and some pickled vegetables in the glass jar my mom always kept stocked. Nothing fancy, but oddly warm, as if no effort was needed. Just being together was enough. How have you been? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. Jack thought for a moment, then said, fine. School's fine, friends are fine. What about you? We're also fine. Understood. Fine was Jack's way of saying he didn't want me to worry. I didn't press. We shifted to smaller things, his English lessons, the neighbor's cat who just gave birth, the backyard fence that would soon need replacing. These little pieces of conversation somehow brought us closer. When night fell, we picked an old movie we used to rewatch every summer. Jack laughed when I still remembered the character's lines, and I quietly marveled at how much deeper his laugh had become. We didn't talk much, but we didn't need to. The silence between 2 people who had once been close didn't feel awkward. It just felt like a bridge slowly being rebuilt, moment by moment, memory by memory, glance by glance across the distance of the years. As I got ready for bed, Jack stood at the stairs, one hand on the railing, looking at me. Thanks for coming home. I looked at him for a while. I needed this too. And I truly did, not just out of responsibility, but because I missed my little brother. And maybe part of me was trying to find myself again in this house, this place that used to be home, and maybe still could be if I were brave enough to stay a little longer. I tossed and turned on my old bed, my back pressed against the mattress that had softened over time. On the wall, there's still a small arc-shaped crack in the upper left corner. Remnants from the time I accidentally threw a book in anger at my mother during my senior year. I thought I had left everything behind when I left this house, but it turns out there are things that don't go anywhere, like the familiar silence that envelops me right now. The lower floor is quiet. Only the sound of the wind blowing through the crack in the door and the faint dripping of the water pipe remained. I closed my eyes, trying to let my mind drift away. But for some reason, Jack's image keeps appearing. His gaze when he looked at me while we both laughed on the old sofa. No longer the gaze of a once dependent little brother. There was something in Jack's eyes, more mature, quieter, as if there was something he hadn't said. A soft knock on the door made me sit up abruptly. Lily, can you come in? Jack's voice rang out, soft and slightly hoarse. I hesitated for a few seconds. It's late, but it wasn't enough reason to refuse. Come in, I said. Jack walked in, holding 2 cups of hot milk. I thought you couldn't sleep, he said, hesitantly handing me a cup. I took it, the warmth spreading through my fingertips. Thank you. You can't sleep either? He nodded, then sat down on the edge of the bed, keeping a just right distance, not too close, but not too far either. We sat like that, each holding a cup of milk, not saying anything for a while. What were you thinking when you left the house? Jack suddenly asked, his eyes fixed on the floor. I thought for a moment and then replied softly, freedom. But I also feel empty. It's like I've just been released from a cage, but I don't know where to fly. Jack nodded. I think so too, even though I'm still here. I looked over. Why didn't you tell me? You always stay silent. Because I think you have enough to worry about, he shrugged. As for me, I'm used to it. A light sigh escaped from me. It feels like I've missed something for all these years. A silent distance grew between the 2 sisters, not because of time or geographical distance, but because of the unspoken things. I gently touched Jack's shoulder. I'm sorry. You don't need to apologize, he said quickly, still not looking at me. You have always been the only one who truly cared about me. It's been so long that I don't know where to start again. We fell silent again, but this time it didn't make me feel lost, but it felt like a necessary pause between 2 notes, each person listening to themselves. When Jack stood up to head back to his room, I held him back for a second. Tomorrow, if you're free, let's go to the old park. The place with the swing where I used to push you? Jack smiled the first time that night. Do you still remember? Of course. That's a place where I once threatened to jump down from a height to force you to buy ice cream. He laughed out loud, the sound echoing like a piece of childhood returning. Tomorrow, meet under the big tree, 9 o'clock. Don't forget to bring money to buy ice cream, I teased. Jack raised his hand in a gesture of commitment. This time, it's on me. With the door closed behind him, I sat for a long time afterward, my heart calming as if a knot had just been untied. There are invisible distances that can be bridged with just a knock on the door, a cup of hot milk, or an invitation to the park to begin healing. And that night, for the first time in many months, I had a peaceful sleep. Yet the early morning breeze was chilly, carrying the scent of fresh grass and a hint of dew still clinging to the leaves. I pulled my coat tighter around me as I stepped across the familiar stone steps leading into the park. It was still the same gravel path lined with old flame trees and the creaky old swing beneath the almond tree. Jack was already there. He sat, gently swaying, both hands tucked into his jacket pockets, face tilted up to catch the first sunlight of the day. Beneath the gray hoodie, he looked both distant and strangely familiar, as if time had quietly drawn a more solemn, still expression on his face that I'd never noticed before. You're here, Jack said with a soft smile, turning his head toward me. I thought you'd oversleep. You thought wrong, I replied, walking closer. I don't oversleep when there's ice cream involved. But we both laughed. A laugh more relaxed than last night's. Like even laughter needed time to be allowed back after long silences. I sat down on a swing beside him, fingers reaching for the cold chain. This park hasn't changed. No, Jack nodded, but I have. You have too. I turned to look at him, about to say something, but wasn't sure where to start, so I just gently swung back and forth, sitting in silence with the rustling leaves overhead. Do you ever wonder, Jack said after a while, how different things would have been if we had a different family? One with less silence, less distance? I didn't answer right away. That question I'd asked myself many times on cold nights alone in my apartment, but I'd never found an answer that brought peace. I think, I said slowly, every family has cracks. The difference is not everyone's willing to look at them. Jack lowered his gaze, his feet still brushing lightly against the ground. I think I used to be really angry with them, but then I just got tired. Being angry too long does that, I said softly. It's like holding a storm inside and refusing to let it pass. A gust of wind passed through, the swing's chains clinking faintly against each other. In that moment, I noticed a change in Jack's eyes. Not the little brother I once comforted when he fell, but someone stepping quietly through the threshold of adulthood, carrying wounds grown-ups rarely notice. I can breathe easier when you're here, Jack said, like someone remembers I exist. Turned toward him, heart tightening. Jack, I've always remembered. I just didn't know how much you needed me to. He gave a small, sad smile. Well, now you know. I couldn't find any words in response. I simply placed my hand on the chain between us, as if to remind him of another kind of chain, invisible but unbroken. We sat there a little longer, watching groups of children run and play in the distance, old couples strolling past each other without needing to speak. Time moved more slowly under the morning sun, gentle and forgiving. Do you regret leaving home? Jack asked suddenly. Post? That's what I guess I had done. And I was like, I paused for a few seconds and nodded. I do, but not for leaving, more for thinking I had to go so far to find myself. And now? He asked again. I turned to him. Now I know some things can't be left behind, like you. Jack's gaze softened. No more words were needed. We both understood that no matter what had happened, that thread of love, memory, and care had never really unraveled. As the sun rose higher and the park grew busier, Jack stood up and held out his hand. Come on, ice cream's on me. Can't let you bring up old stories and make me dwell on them forever. I laughed, took his hand and stood up. And in that moment, I realized maybe healing doesn't have to begin with grand conversations, but simply with a morning, a swing, and someone willing to sit beside you in silence. The afternoon passed quietly, as if time itself wanted to pause for a while for two souls in the process of healing. After getting ice cream and strolling through old streets, Jack and I returned home in silence. Not awkward, not tense, just a simple, peaceful quiet. Like in the old days, when we studied together, each in our own corner, yet still aware of each other's presence. I sat on the sofa, legs curled up, an open magazine resting in my lap, though I couldn't read a single word. In the kitchen, Jack was washing the dishes from our simple dinner, fried eggs and salad. He had always been that way, quiet yet thoughtful in his own unique way. Like the gentle trickling of water blended with the soft clinking of spoons, I realized I was smiling without even knowing when it started. What are you thinking about? Jack's voice called out from the kitchen, unexpected but gentle. I flinched slightly, but not in a bad way. I was just remembering when you were little. Back then I used to think if I tried hard enough, you would never have to feel lonely. Jack paused for a moment, then resumed washing. Maybe you did. I just never said it out loud. I slowly folded the magazine closed, but then I left. You didn't leave. Jack stepped out, drawing his hands on a towel. You just went to find your own life. Everyone needs to do that. I looked up at my younger brother, the same boy who used to be afraid of the dark and wouldn't sleep unless I told him a bedtime story. Now, he was nearly a head taller than me, eyes deeper, as if carrying thoughts far beyond 18. How did you grow up so fast? I asked, half joking, half sincere. Because you weren't here to remind me to slow down, Jack replied, looking straight at me. His words were light, but they caught in my throat. We looked at each other for a while. No dodging, no hiding. Then Jack broke the silence with a simple question. Want to play a game? I laughed, a lightness lifting from my chest. But if I win this time, you're doing the dishes. We both sat down on the living room floor, controllers in hand. Amid cheerful background music and bursts of laughter, the space between us seemed to shrink. But when the screen went dark and the light dimmed, I found myself facing a subtler reality where every action, glance, and word carried a second meaning. Jack sat beside me, back against the couch, eyes fixed on the window where the streetlights cast a soft glow. There was a time I hated you, he said. I turned to him, surprised. Really? Oh, When you left, I didn't understand why you didn't take me with you. I exhaled slowly, a weight settling in my chest. Back then, I didn't understand myself either. I thought leaving this place would be enough to escape everything. And did you? I shook my head. No, because I left behind the most important part, you. The space between us grew quieter than when neither of us spoke. Then Jack spoke again, this time barely above a whisper. I don't want us to go back to how things were, because I know that's not possible. But I want us to find a new way to be together, one that feels better. I felt my throat tighten, not from fear, but from emotion, because my little brother, the boy who once feared losing me, was now the one pulling me back. I want that too, Jack, I said softly, placing my hand on the back of his. But it'll take time. And honesty. Jack nodded. I'm ready. As long as you're not leaving again, I'm not going anywhere. I smiled gently, at least not yet. Inside me, there were still questions, still unnamed shadows. But in that moment, as our hands touched lightly, I understood a new journey was beginning. Not to go back, but to move forward together in a way that finally felt right. Night felt like a thin blanket, gently covering the laughter of the afternoon. Most of the lights in the house were off, leaving only a warm amber glow spilling from the living room, where I sat alone, a cup of hot tea in my hands. Jack had gone up to his room early, saying he needed some rest. I understood. Some kinds of exhaustion don't come from the body, but from the things we can't put into words. And today, we'd said more than we ever dared to before. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees in the yard. Inside, only the ticking of the clock and the sound of my own breathing remained. I set my tea down on the table and quietly got up, heading toward the stairs. I didn't know exactly why. Maybe it was the need to be sure my little brother was okay, but I climbed the steps and paused in front of Jack's door. The door was slightly ajar. A dim glow from his phone cast a small patch of light on the ceiling. I was about to turn away when Jack's voice came, soft as a breath. You can't sleep? I pushed the door open gently and stepped in. Jack was lying on his side, phone face down beside his pillow, his eyes tired but still alert. Not used to the old bed anymore, I said, half joking. What about you? Jack shook his head. I was just thinking. I sat down on the edge of the bed, keeping a respectful distance between us. About what? Jack was silent for a long while. Then he quietly said, about what it feels like to not belong anywhere. At school, I pretend to be okay. At home, I pretend to be strong. Only when you're around do I feel like I can actually be myself. I swallowed hard. I hadn't expected those simple words to squeeze my heart so tightly. I'm sorry, I whispered. I didn't know you felt so alone. It's not your fault, Jack replied, his voice low. I wish things were easier. I looked at him and I could feel the emptiness he had carried for years. The weight I had unknowingly left behind. A truth that needed no excuses. I won't let you face it all alone anymore, I said, my voice catching. Promise? I nodded without hesitation. I promise. I sat there in silence, saying nothing more. But in that quiet moment, I knew. This was the first time in a long while that Jack could breathe without bracing himself. The next morning, soft sunlight slipped through the curtains, spreading across the kitchen the warm scent of fried eggs and toasted bread. Jack was fumbling with the frying pan, murmuring something in sync with the music playing from the small speaker on the shelf. I stood by the doorway, watching him as if seeing him for the first time. No longer the little boy I used to rush through brushing his teeth every morning. Jack was now a young man learning how to live with kindness, even when the world around him wasn't easy. What on earth are you doing? I asked with a soft laugh, walking closer. A reconciliation breakfast, Jack replied without turning around. Do you like your eggs runny or well done? I like anything that isn't burnt, I said, and we both laughed. In that moment, something in the air between us had shifted. No more tension, no more distance, just presence, sincere and gentle, as if the conversation we'd had the night before had washed away something heavy. The following days passed with a new rhythm. We cleaned the house together, rewatched old movies, picked up the jigsaw puzzle we'd once left unfinished. I'd never seen Jack laugh so much. Not the kind of laugh that hides pain, but real laughter, loud and clear. One late afternoon, while we were watering the plants in the yard, Jack suddenly asked, "Do you think I can live differently? I mean, do I always have to be strong?" I looked at him for a long time, then nodded. "I think the bravest thing is to live honestly with how you feel. And you've already done that." Jack didn't say anything more. He just quietly went back to his task. But I knew that some shell around him had just fallen away. On the day our parents returned, I stood beside Jack at the door to greet them. Both of us wore calm smiles. There was no need to explain everything. What needed to change had already happened. And it was in the way we looked at each other, in how we moved forward through the quiet days together. Before I left, Jack walked me to the car. Just before I opened the door, he said, "I know things aren't perfect, but I think for the first time, I don't feel lost anymore." I gave his shoulder a gentle squeeze. Me neither. Just not rushed, not awkward. A hug of renewal from things we once thought were gone. On the road back to my little apartment, I didn't feel like I was leaving anything behind because for the first time in years, I knew my brother and I had found each other again. Not as perfect siblings, and the truest form of human connection. And that was the beginning of a new chapter, quiet, sincere, and complete. Returning to my small apartment in the city center, I found everything just as I'd left it. The white walls, the overflowing bookshelf, and the coffee cup I forgot to wash before leaving. But I was different. All the usual sounds, the traffic outside, the soft knock of a delivery person, the music drifting in from a neighbor's apartment, suddenly felt unusually vivid. They no longer irritated me the way they used to. Every sound reminded me of presence, of life, of others, and of myself. In the first few days, Jack and I texted each other every morning. Just a few simple lines: "Sleep well, what are you eating today?" The kind of things that once seemed trivial, but now I realized were more important than I had ever thought. One time, he sent me a photo, a piece of toast, badly burned on the side, with the caption, "Try cooking today, skill level no casualties yet." I burst out laughing, then immediately replied with a photo of the noodles I'd just made, which didn't look much better. We didn't talk about that night again. Not because we were avoiding it, but because we both understood what mattered wasn't the explanation, but the way we were moving forward. Gently, maturely. Once, walking past a bookstore, I saw a novel Jack used to love back in middle school. I bought a copy and mailed it to him with a note. "The ending's still as good as ever, but maybe now you'll understand it differently." A week later, Jack replied, "I finished it. And you're right, the story didn't change. We grew up." That message left me speechless, not because of the maturity in his words, but because I realized Jack's growth wasn't just a sudden breakthrough over a few days. It was a long journey. And I was lucky I came back in time to walk alongside him for a part of it. Start journaling again, a habit I had abandoned for years. Every evening, I'd write down the little things from the day: a cup of coffee that tasted stronger than usual, a handwritten letter from an old friend, the smile of a colleague after receiving a compliment. As I realized, ordinary things, when appreciated, become more precious than anything else. One night, Jack called on video. His face was pale from a cold, voice hoarse. "It's nothing. Don't worry," he said. But I still ordered a box of oranges and some medicine to be delivered to the house the next morning. A small gesture, but for the first time, I didn't feel guilty about not being able to always be there with him, because I understood true connection doesn't depend on distance. It lies in how we care at the right time and with sincerity. I returned home on a late autumn afternoon. The breeze was crisp, golden leaves scattered across the front porch, and an old song drifted from the living room, the one Jack used to play every Sunday morning. Everything reminded me of something familiar I once lost. The door opened, and he stood there, taller now, his hair a little longer, but the eyes were still Jack's, gentle, warm, and needing no words to understand each other. Yo, home, he said, unable to hide his smile. Yes, I'm home, I replied, stepping into a house that now felt like more than a place. It was part memory, part revival. We cooked dinner together. For the first time in months, no tension, no need to measure our words, just two people who cared, sharing an evening. Amid the clatter of pans and bursts of laughter, I realized sometimes the most beautiful things are born after the longest silences. After dinner, Jack took me to the backyard. He'd hung a few string lights, laid a thin blanket on the grass, and had 2 mugs of hot cocoa ready. Dude, this time, you're not allowed to run, he said, sitting down beside me. You used to disappear when things got complicated, but this time you stayed, and I'm grateful for that. I stayed quiet for a while. Then I exhaled because this time I realized leaving doesn't make things go away. It just makes you lose the things that matter. Jack nodded, asking nothing more. We sat next to each other, not saying much, just listening to the wind rustling through the old trees, feeling the steady rhythm of time. The same time I used to race against, but now just wanted to live with. As the night grew deeper, I turned to him. Jack, do you think everything's changed? Yeah, he said, but not in a scary way. I think we've grown, both of us. I smiled for the first time in a long while without the weight in my chest. We had crossed something that didn't have a name. Maybe it was a boundary, a feeling, a confusion. But once crossed, what remained wasn't distance, but understanding. Growing up, I believe, isn't about never making mistakes. It's about stopping after the mistake, recognizing it, and learning how to hold on to what's worth keeping. I no longer saw Jack as a little brother who needed protection. I saw him as a young man learning to become himself, maybe clumsy, maybe lost at times, but always sincere and brave. And I, for the first time in years, no longer lived as someone carrying responsibilities meant for adults. I began learning how to forgive myself for the things I did, the things I didn't do, and the things I would never be able to do again. That night, I lay in my old bedroom, staring at the lightly peeling ceiling, and thought to myself, if given the chance, I would still choose to come back here. I would still choose to listen to Jack, to understand him, and to walk through all those silences because I knew there are things you only find when you're brave enough to stay. And maybe only then do we truly grow up. There are relationships that cannot be named, that can no longer be held the way they once were, but that shouldn't be lost either. Lily and Jack crossed a fragile boundary, not to stay there, but to understand that sometimes genuine affection must be transformed into support, into listening, and into growth. Because growing up, after all, is learning to choose what to hold on to and finding the courage to let go of what must be closed. What do you think about the emotional journey Lily and Jack went through? Which moment resonated with you the most? Have there been connections in your own life that once confused you, but later helped you understand yourself more deeply? Share your thoughts in the comments. Every perspective is a valuable lens.